Jeff Hutchison is driving you home. ABC Radio Perth.
Back in 2010, I was a participant in a strange and essentially very cruel public conversation about a young woman who desperately needed a liver transplant to survive. Now, ordinarily, such a story would elicit kindness and good wishes. But when it was revealed that Claire Murray had a history of drug problems, everything seemed to change, and the public debate became all about whether or not she was entitled to a transplant. In essence, was she deserving enough? It was gruesome, and some of the reporting was offensive. And even as I reflect on my own coverage of the issue back then, however well-intended my attempts might have been to be fairer to Claire Murray and her family, none of us knew anything about her. We were informing a public rush to judgment on someone we didn't know. Well, some 10 years on, a new documentary has been made about Claire Murray, and it offers insights that should probably shame us for our rush to judgment, and some media outlets particularly. It's called Wild Butterfly, and in a moment, Claire's father will join me in the studio, Michael. So too drug expert Steve Allsop. But first, just have a listen to this. The first voices you will hear are Claire's parents.
It took me a long time to accept that Claire was a drug addict.
Claire's condition is very serious. Her only chance of survival is a liver transplant.
And you think you'd be able to take what's coming next, and I couldn't.
Young Perth
The
mother.
media were just in a frenzy. Wherever we went, they were there.
Denied a liver transplant.
Let's face it, you're a junkie. Do you deserve a second chance?
I was absolutely shocked. The way they portrayed her was like a worthless human being.
Claire's condition is serious.
They had a poll on her life. Do you think she deserves to live or die? It's like somebody's just stabbed you in the heart.
Oh, will anybody ever find out the true story?
The media had no idea what instigated it.
Michael and Steve, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
Michael, why did you agree to be part of this documentary and the retelling of this incredibly sad event in your family's life?
I suppose really what instigated it was Claire's wish for her story to be told, to try and right a few of the wrongs that sort of came with her condition and the position she was in, and most certainly in Singapore when we had a chat and things weren't looking as good as they could be. Claire was very aware of what could have been and what should have been and the way she was being treated. So hence, with the good people involved, we went on and decided to go ahead and tell the story and do the movie.
And in our collective rush to judgment, what did we not know about Claire?
Well, to be fair, you probably didn't know an awful lot. We were very, as parents at the time, as you can probably appreciate, we were sort of very raw, and we're in a position where it was sort of life-saving stuff with our daughter at the time. Our priorities were to make our daughter good, to make our daughter better, to save our daughter's life. So the information that was received was sort of received probably on a compassionate basis, and whether it was dealt with in a compassionate basis, then that was the question that had to be asked.
Mm. The public opinion for some was that she was this ungrateful junkie. Can you give us some context as to why she used drugs and what we now know through this documentary about your daughter that we certainly didn't know then, and yet we still made those rushed judgments about?
Yeah, well, Claire, as you know, it's well documented in the documentary, had a dark past, and we never found this out until Claire was sort of, in 16 years of age. And in turn, that was another battle for us again, because, like, as parents, and I think most people would appreciate this, that you you'll always back your own child in. Claire, was diagnosed with ADDH at one part of her life very early, and we sort of listened and believed medical opinion at the time. And before we knew it, thinking that it couldn't be my child, it wouldn't be my child. How could my child possibly do that? She was a really, really good student at a good school at the time, and it just spiraled out of control real quick.
A victim of a violent assault, ongoing mental health issues. She was having a bad time.
Yeah, she most certainly was. It was just horrible. How we question ourselves and ask us all the time. We ask, both her mum, myself, and our brother and sisters. Did we do enough? Could we have done more? But we were just sort of basic parents in suburbia, sort of trying to do the right thing by your child. And we've 2 other children, and in the perfect world, everything was going well until this came up and hit us, and sort of all the more which instigated us to go and tell the story. It really encouraged us to, when we thought back deep about what had happened and what had occurred, and with the encouragement from the people that were involved in it, we said, yeah, it would be a good story to tell and perhaps for people to learn from it.
Indeed. I used to speak to you on occasions. Probably said, Mr. Murray, welcome to the program. What happens next? Or we've just heard this. What is Claire's future like? Can you tell me what it was like for you and Val to be bombarded with the opinions of others about your daughter, the television news polls? Does she deserve this? Does she not?
Again, as you can imagine, it wasn't right. We were sort of very raw and inexperienced, and everything that we said it with compassion, and hopefully that it was going to be received with compassion. But unfortunately, when you say some words and other people turn them around and put spins on them, and it comes out as something different in the paper the next morning, you're very, very, very angry. You're very, very angry. But the priority it was, and all the time, what kept us going was to save our daughter's life.
I want to bring you, Steve, into this conversation. Michael Murray is my guest. We're talking about a documentary called Wild Butterfly. We speak regularly, Steve, about drug-related issues. Also know that you're a friend of Michael's. How do you reflect on what Wild Butterfly reveals?
First, it's devastating. Anybody who sees the film says that. It's absolutely devastating. And what's devastating about it is the judgment that some people are quick to rush to. And that judgment has all sorts of implications. So, even the term junkie. And I said the other night, Claire was not a junkie. She was a mother, she was a daughter, she was a sister, she was a friend. But as soon as that term gets used, and as it was used in one particular media story, it was used to denigrate her, that she was undeserving. And she brought it on herself. Now, as the story unfolds, we realise that this is much more complex than that. And this is the reality of what happens in relation to drug use. It's quite legitimate to judge people who use drugs and say, well, they're not deserving, if we do the same for people who don't have a good diet, people who drive their car too fast, people who go climbing mountains and need rescued, or go out in an expensive boat to travel around the world and we have to get the Navy out to rescue them. We do our best for people. That's not to say people don't have a personal responsibility. But in this case, if somebody's been sexually assaulted as a child and their drug use is intimately tied up in that. Now, not everybody who uses drugs is in that situation. But the people who end up in our treatment services, a large proportion of them have a whole range of problems, mental health issues. What happens, and what happened to Claire was, judgment is then made. Proper diagnosis doesn't occur because we leap to a conclusion that, well, this is what's going on. She's just a junkie. And you can see that again in the film, that judgment was made without proper diagnosis, without proper care. There was poor communication across the system. Again, it doesn't happen all the time. But all of this combined to the most dreadful of outcome for Claire and for her family. And as a friend of Michael's and now as a friend of the broader family, I find it personally devastating. But it's a story that's too often told, too often happens.
My guests on ABC Radio Perth Drive this evening, listening to Professor Steve Allsop, Michael Murray. We're telling a little of a documentary called Wild Butterfly, and it's the story of Claire Murray. And when I went to a screening with both of you last year, what struck me was our unwillingness to look beyond the superficial. You know, the ease with much of the community's opinion of Claire's case was prejudiced by her drug use. And then you add to that none of us having any knowledge of or consideration of her mental health issues. And I wonder, Michael, what is it like for you to watch that documentary? I remember at that screening, I kept looking over at you. You and your wife and broader family were active participants in the telling of this story and the setting of the record straight. But what is it like for you to see it?
Last Sunday was my 6th time to see it, and it's most certainly not getting easier, because every time I see it, I see something different in it. But I do believe it's a very, very powerful story, you know, and the more I see it, the more I believe in it.
What do you see differently? What do you see? What did you notice on the 6th viewing?
Well, as a layperson, sort of, you know, sitting back and watching, like, how the experts dealt with it along the way, like the medical fraternity and the media and the police department, the education department, to look back and see now, you know, how dilly-dally that came about and how unprofessional they were with their investigations, and, you know, how things could have been an awful lot better and an awful lot quicker. And, like, hence, going back to the story, like, my daughter was sexually assaulted. Like, I'm 110% convinced that happened. And that guy or person is still out there. And that's a big part of what I see as well. And I mentioned it on Sunday night. There's so many Claire Murrays out there. And hopefully, like, this documentary will like, people will get to understand, and we can educate people, you know, to pay attention to these little things that are going on.
And that's what I found very interesting about the way in which this documentary is being marketed. Steve, who needs to see it? Who is it being aimed at?
Well, I think everybody needs to see it. It is an it is devastating. For a lot of people, they will find that devastating, too hard to watch. But I think it's something that our decision makers should see. We showed it in Tasmania, and a very senior politician there saw it and said every politician should see it. It's been shown to journalist programs. We're talking about developing better education around that, so we have trauma-informed journalism. And what I should say is the experience with the media all that time ago was dreadful. The experience with the media now is different, and that's a good sign. So I don't want to say everything's bad, it's improving things. And, you know, when Michael approached me about this, and when he first did, I said, I can't encourage this because the family was so devastated the first time it happened. And then I said, well, there's one person, the director, Shireen, who can make a movie like this. She has a clinical background as well as a film director background. And she's done a fantastic job. And I think it's something that school teachers, we've seen stories in the media the last few days about what can happen when we don't address things within the school system. And that's a part of Claire's story as well. I think sporting clubs, community leaders, parents, we should see this and not just use it as something to observe and be upset about for a while. Claire wanted to make a difference. This film can make a difference if there's that conversation, the interest from people such as yourself, from the community leaders, from the broad community itself.
And Michael, at the end of this long, long process, which now requires you to speak again of these bitter circumstances, how are you about that which has been made and will now find an audience. How do you feel about this film?
I have to say I feel fantastic that it's done. I really, really, it feels like I've fulfilled sort of, which we most certainly have, myself and my family have fulfilled our daughter's dream. You know, her wish and her legacy, that's what she wanted to do. And there was Claire she was anything but a silly person, my daughter was. She was anything but a silly person. And she knew and she understood what the message had to be told and how the message had to be told. And we, as I said, with the help of these other good people, put this documentary together, and I think it's done us proud, and I'm so happy with it.
Thank you so much for coming in, Michael Murray. Professor Steve Allsop. The film is Wild Butterfly. We can explain, we don't have time tonight, we can explain how people can see it, but the aim is to have it in so many schools and so many different environments. It is one that people need to see. Thank you both very much for coming in.
Thank you.